have always had the misgivings that they have never been given the peace commitments for the sacrifices that they made.
Pakistan has to return about $80 billion. And one wonders where this $80 billion is going to come out from.
Because of the remittances of overseas Pakistanis that it refuses to give a right to vote, and that it has recently started to call digital terrorists. B, it does this by borrowing more from the IMF and the World Bank.
Hello and very warm welcome from our London studios. I am Suhail Qureshi, your host today, and I have a very special guest who's joined us on a video link from Pakistan, Taimur Khan Jhagra, who is the former finance minister for KPK province of Pakistan and is currently a member of the political committee of PTI of Imran Khan. Taimur is an educated young man who has come with a mission and joined politics and PTI in 2018. And since then, he has been very actively participating not in the political process, but in the elections. Today, I'm going to ask him about the economic crisis, which is entwined with the political crisis of Pakistan. And being in the finance sector of Pakistan, I would ask Taimur what's going on, how the Pakistani phoenix has gone down, probably not to rise again, and how we are into this external debt-ridden economy, and there doesn't appear to be any salvation, at least from here where we are sitting. So very warm welcome to you, Taimur. I'll just go straight to the brass tack, actually. We have this price hike and high inflation, and I know that there has been political turmoil. But what we hear, the current political government, they're all blaming it onto your government, the 3.5 years of PTI government. And they say everything from a small price hike to the huge electricity bills is because of the wrong policies, your party's wrong policies. So what do you have to say about that?
It seems that if you take what the Form 47 government is saying, a government that only won 17 seats in a House of 336, then Pakistan was exceptionally well run for something like 70 odd years, from independence till 2018, 71 years. And then in 3 years, Pakistan changed from being something like a Western European developed economy to becoming a sub-Saharan country. And now these poor sods are suffering with it. Of course, this is not the truth. First, if Pakistan has had problems, it's had problems because governments over 70 years have neglected the fundamentals of Pakistan's governance, and they've neglected the fundamentals of economic development. And only 3 parties have governed Pakistan effectively since partition, certainly since the late 50s. We've either had military governments, or we've had one form or the other of the Muslim League, or we've had one form or the other of the People's Party. There's no one else. PTI and Imran Khan broke that trichotomy on power in 2018. And you have to remember that while inheriting an economy on the verge of default, because of Ishaq Dar's unique brand of economic policy, PTI started the process of reform. PTI took an economy that had completely stagnated to 6% growth, and PTI did this in the worst economic recession and global health crisis that has happened since the Great Depression of the 1930s and since the Spanish flu of 1917. To be able to do this at such a time, our record may not be perfect, but it speaks for itself and will stand up favorably in comparison, certainly, with these, jokers from PMLN and the People's Party.
Yeah, but the main thing is that whatever the number that you are quoting, somehow at the towards the end of actually your government, no matter how ceremonious it was and how scandalous it was, there were still inflation. I think one of the hardest criticism on your government was that delaying in taking the IMF bailout package, which to some had affected or accumulated the troubles on the economic fronts.
I mean, you can argue and debate about some of this. You could argue that we could have approached the IMF quickly. When I used to talk to Asad Umar at the time, who was the finance minister, he was actually trying to find an alternate solution because he felt that the pain and shock of an IMF program of the sort that they were suggesting would be unprecedented. There was an alternate view in the party as well, and we ultimately went to the IMF. And I actually subscribed to the view that we should have gone to the IMF. I think, though, that when you talk of inflation in our government, you have to put it in the context both of what we inherited, where we were burning through foreign reserves at $2 billion a month, and therefore needed a pathway out. There were 4 or 5 relatively easy years which were the perfect platform for reform. Between 2013 and 2018, when oil prices were low, which was shockingly and criminally wasted by Nawaz Sharif, Ishaq Dar, and the PMLN government. And you also have to look at the fact that COVID and the post-COVID recovery first caused a massive economic shock, the likes of which none of us have seen in our lives, and then created a super commodity pricing crisis the world over because global supply chains weren't geared to suddenly ramp up towards the demands of a normalizing economy. In that situation, it is true that we got criticized for 12 to 13% in inflation. But what we kept on saying has proven to be true. One, that we were on the journey of economic reform and that the taking away of a stable government was going to create political and economic volatility. That has been proven true because inflation ended up skyrocketing from the 12 to 13% to something like 40% and has brought tears to the eyes of ordinary Pakistanis. Pakistanis have gone through immense pain. They've seen their purchasing power halved in the last 2 years, and it is because of that disruption. So I think on balance, PTI's record in terms of salvaging the economy, taking the economy through COVID, engineering growth, to be able to reduce the pain, right? And obviously when you engineered growth, some of it was going to be consumption-led at the time, but there was clear and tangible movement towards the restructuring of an economy. And I can point to 2 indicators. One, export, which had been stuck between $24 and $25 billion, skyrocketed to about $32 billion within a year. And 2, remittances went up to over $3 billion a month from an average of around $2 billion a month, and immediately fell the moment the government was changed. So these were very, very strong green shoots. And I think the lesson we can learn from April 2022 is Pakistan has paid a massive price for the constant disruption of democratic governments. And it is finally the time that we commit to a political process and to continuity for governments, but also through a clean democratic process and not the embarrassment of the elections that we've seen in Pakistan, so that we can progress like other countries that we ought to see as our peers, economic peers such as India, Vietnam, Korea, all of which have left Pakistan miles behind.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the things have not been well for a very long time, and on the labor productivity numbers in the Asia, we are probably the last 5 or 6 countries out of about almost 40, 50 countries. and not even, and including the Asian countries like, as you mentioned, India and Taiwan and Hong Kong and even Bangladesh. So I'll take you back to the two figures that you quoted about the remittances and the COVID, the post-COVID recovery of economy. So yes, but those are good indicators. But what was the size of DFI, the direct financial investment? Because that is actually the money that comes to help a country develop. Do you have any data on that, or do you have any view on that? What did you see any DFI increase within those 3.5 years of your government?
Investment was increasing, obviously, through COVID. Effectively, the global economy stopped, right? So that impacted what happened. But I think as far as investment is concerned, foreign direct investment, which is what you're talking about, FDI, is not going to be something that we can find a silver bullet for. We can't hope that we suddenly strike millions of barrels of oil a day. It's not going to happen. And we can't assume that a single intervention, such as the SIFC, which was something that our PDM1 government collaborated on with the military leadership to try and create a one-stop shop bypass solution for investment. None of these are actually going to work to actually resolve the structural barriers to investment in Pakistan. And I'm saying this as a financial expert and as someone who believes that we need to be able to say truth to power. Why do I say this? Because the real signal of Pakistan enjoying the confidence of investors is when multinational investors by themselves start to invest their money in Pakistan. When large British firms, large European firms, large American firms, large Asian firms start investing in Pakistan, because it is a market of 250 million people and an exciting market to invest in. This is a million miles from being the case today. And what this requires, one, is political stability. Because no one puts their money in a country that can press the self-destruct button politically every 3 to 4 years. And the second thing that is required is a free market that allows competition to occur and therefore allows private sector players to feel that if they invest in Pakistan, that they can make a profit, and where required, that they can repatriate those profits to their own country, and that the market in Pakistan is exciting enough both to be able to develop capacity to export from Pakistan as well as to serve the domestic market. This is not the case. Today, multinational companies are not allowed to repatriate money because we have a foreign exchange problem. Today, the manufacturing industry is stunted because we restrict imports, because we have a foreign exchange crisis. Today, in most industries, we don't allow competition. And today, we don't allow the tech sector to boom because we are too afraid of criticism of the political mishandling of the crisis, of the constitutional crisis in Pakistan, because of which every second or third day, the internet is stifled in Pakistan. Who invests in such conditions in any country in meaningful numbers? If we don't recognize this, we are just burying our head in the sand, and we are doing a disservice to Pakistan.
Yeah, you alluded to the political instability. I think that is really joined by the hip as a twin with the economy. And I think they are like a yin and yang, the economy and the political stability. And that has been an issue for quite some time. Now, I know that Mohammad Aurangzeb has taken over, is a Dutch Pakistani, and as a new finance minister, one of the outsiders from the political system. And he had been chairing the Habib Bank Limited. Do you think he has something special in his heart that he can pull out and bring the Pakistani economy to the shores?
The short answer is no. First, it does take a political government to steer Pakistan out of the political and economic crisis that we have today. But because the foundations of this PMLN government is based on the quicksand of winning 17 seats and being given majority through the sort of electoral fudging, through the forgery of results, not even rigging at a level that the worst tin pot dictatorship would be embarrassed to present to the world. I don't think that such a government has a mandate. And I think you can see that in the timidity of the budgetary recommendations and the approved budget, in which case it seemed that the only objective of the government was to somehow tick the boxes for the IMF. And I'm sure that even if they had just handed over the budget to the IMF to make, the IMF would have made a better, fairer budget. But they simply wanted to make the numbers. They needed to show that revenue was going to increase from 9,000 billion rupees to 13,000 billion rupees. And to do that, they have basically targeted all the small sections of the economy that were already under immense pressure of being in the formal economy, the salaried class, the corporate sector that already pays income tax. And the result of this is going to be the casification of the economy, a further brain drain of the middle class and the upper middle class. Because why would you pay 50% plus tax in Pakistan, living in a non-meritocracy, living in a quasi-non-democracy, when if you can go and migrate to Europe or the UK or the US, and compete in a meritocracy and pay less tax and get significantly better services. That is the choice that this cartoon of a government is giving to ordinary Pakistanis. And I think similarly, why would any multinationals already present in Pakistan invest when they are being saddled with super taxes, when the informal sector is not being brought in the net, right? And at periods of high inflation. And you can see that just a few days ago, the energy minister, Musaddiq Malik, admitted on the floor of the Senate that no large oil and gas companies are willing to work in Pakistan in exploration and production. And I remember just 20 years ago, when I was a young engineer exploring oil and gas wells across the 4 provinces of Pakistan, at least 5 large international oil companies that were very excited about their operations in Pakistan. There's British Petroleum, there are Tullow Oil and Lasmo Oil, both large British companies. There was OMV, which is the largest Austrian national oil company, and there was Petronas, which is one of the biggest Asian giants of oil and gas production, and the Malaysian national oil companies. None of those companies exist in Pakistan today, and they don't exist because we simply don't give the international market reason to get excited about Pakistan.
Yeah, I think the two main things in any society, one is the human capital, and then currently the energy crisis. These two factors are affecting the productivity of our economy. And I think in both of those areas, Pakistan has been suffering. I was reading on the other day on a financial magazine that in next three or so years, Pakistan has to return about $80 billion. And one wonders where this $80 billion is going to come out from. Most probably the poor people, and the rich will have the immunity once again. What are your views on that?
What is the real pain point is that while we need to borrow tens of billions of dollars every year to be able to pay off old debt, that the state of Pakistan, the federal and provincial bureaucracy, simply don't realize that they need to change the structure of the way that Pakistan as a state is run and continue a level of fiscal irresponsibility that you would be hard pressed to imagine any patriotic, capable managers of doing. Let me tell you what I mean, and let me answer your question as well. As far as where Pakistan is going to ensure that it pays this $20 billion a year, because Pakistan's current account deficit over a year tends to be around 30 to 40 billion dollars, the difference between exports and
Yeah.
imports.
Yes.
It ends up doing this, A, because of the remittances of overseas Pakistanis that it refuses to give a right to vote and that it has recently started to call digital terrorists. B, it does this by borrowing more from the IMF and the World Bank. And that is okay because that is the need of the hour. But what we need to see along with that is a clear intent of changing and getting out of this vicious cycle. And C, it does it by begging friendly countries to roll over loans of effectively of around $9 billion or so between Saudi Arabia and China, and another $3 to $4 billion, I believe, from the UAE and other countries, and effectively have money from those countries lying on our balance sheet simply to make the numbers work. This is not sustainable. We need to be able to export more. We need to be able to produce more. And to do it, we need to change the structure of the state. But along with that, we also need to be spending less. And just to throw a couple of numbers at you, Mohammad Aurangzeb, who comes from Habib Bank, has been the CEO, has been at ABN AMRO, I believe, gave every public sector employee in Pakistan a 25% raise on behalf of a government whose revenue only covers their debt interest payments. This is a question I ask you. Would Aurangzeb do that at Habib Bank if Habib Bank were broke, to give his employees a 25% raise? And it's worse than just doing it in the federal government. They do it, once the federal government has done it, all the provincial governments need to follow. The quantum of that raise is 1.5 trillion rupees. 1.5 trillion rupees. When you compare that to the additionality of the income taxes raised on the salaried class already pays something like 360 billion rupees, and the increased income tax is going to make them pay about 450, 460 billion rupees. This is an increase of between 80 and 100 billion rupees. Now imagine 100 billion rupees raised, but another 1.4 trillion that Mohammad Aurangzeb is going to need to borrow to pay 5 million public sector employees who represent 5% of our labor force. You would not get this in any serious country. We also have a pension structure that we in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa worked on, that the federal government is now trying to replicate, where we have a pension bill that 20 years ago stood at less than 10 billion rupees nationally, and now stands at 2,000 billion rupees and doubles every 4 years. So in 10 years, this pension bill will be 10 trillion or 10,000 billion rupees. It is unbelievable. Not only do we need a defined contribution pension system for new employees, we need every public sector employee to be contributing towards their pension or towards the national pension bill. Otherwise, it is people like us who are footing the bill, and the state that is going to need to borrow more and more simply to pay salaries and pensions. Along with this, we have an electricity system that doesn't work. We have gas, natural gas, that the government can't provide to its population. We have a road network that isn't maintained well. We have universities that are far too many in number and underfunded. We have schools and hospitals that, again, are significant in number. We have 150,000 schools. We have over 100,000 hospital beds in the country. But 80% of the hospital beds are dysfunctional. because 80% of hospitals in remote areas don't get electricity. We have so many problems that we can fix if we restructure the way we spend and we restructure the governance structure of our state that can create significant economic and service delivery upside. But we don't do it. And I'm sorry, Mohammad Aurangzeb has already lost his chance because when you're serious, you make the biggest changes up front. And he has failed to do that.
Yeah, I'm glad that you have a very comprehensive kind of analysis of what it is. But I was wondering, when you were in power, were you a part of the financial team or economic team? And were you able to express these views at the time?
Yes, we did, and we actually made big changes. I'll give you 2 or 3 examples. And we made popular changes and we made unpopular changes. In 2019, we didn't raise salaries at all. I was a big proponent of that because when we were in a fiscal crunch, it made no sense to raise salaries. In 2020, we didn't raise salaries again because we were in the middle of a COVID crisis. These took political courage. That's a separate story that later on some of the more populist elements in our party then succumbed under the pressure of a employee union base that wanted a salary raised, and we always pay a price for this. But in terms of the sort of things that we've done to change the service delivery structure of the state, I'll name 4 or 5. In our first year in KP, we cut unnecessary development projects by half, creating about 300 billion rupees of savings in 2018. In 2020, in 2020 or was it 2021? In 2021
it was, yes.
We actually were the first government in the history of Pakistan to release our entire development budget on day 1 of the financial year, having looked at a lot of data. And amongst streamlining development spending, what that also did was significantly cut the amount of low-level corruption that happens at the level of individual projects when project managers or external contractors go to get releases. Our biggest success, of course, was the Sehat card, which is our program of universal insurance. And what that actually proves is that government, for example, in healthcare doesn't need to get into the business of building hospitals for everyone. That if it can think innovatively, it can actually provide healthcare for everyone and encourage both the public and private sector. Our second biggest success in KP was outsourcing secondary hospitals in the periphery to non-government providers, which created a 500% increase in footfall in those hospitals, and again showed that if government doctors, for example, don't go to the periphery or to far-flung areas in Pakistan, we can make other models work. We did this in FATA. And our pension reform, at the time, for which I was very heavily criticized by the employee unions in the KP government, but which created the first contributory pension system for new government employees in KP in 2022, in our 5th year, has now been replicated by the federal government, by the Punjab government, and by the Balochistan government, and the Sindh government will replicate it next year because everyone else has done it. Is the sort of courageous reform which, when President Macron tried it in France, you saw the riots that happened there. So you can't really say that even if we couldn't do everything perfectly, that we didn't do big and bold things and not just make claims on TV.
I'm glad that you mentioned KPK, and this is the 3rd time that your government is in KPK, unprecedented. And of course, the reform that you mentioned. No economy can progress if there is no sustained and sustainable policies. Now, the question is this, so let's take the center away and let's focus on KPK. Do you think that you have developed sustainable policies for the human development, economic development in KPK, which should ideally be bearing some fruits so that the living standards in KPK is better than the rest?
The living standards in what I would correctly pronounce as Khyber Pakhtunkhwa or Pakhtunkhwa, and therefore even the acronym should be KP rather than KPK.
Okay.
Living standards have actually improved massively over the last 10 years. And that is both because of the on-the-ground development work done, primarily because of the vision of Imran Khan, and also because the fact that we have a vibrant population and a vibrant labor force that will go anywhere in the world to earn an income, and the impact of that expatriate Pashtun and KP population working in the Gulf, working in the UK, working elsewhere in the world, in Malaysia, and sending money back has been a significant development dividend in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Look, we had a very interesting experiment in the last year when, after we dissolved the provincial assembly, a government of caretakers was cherry picked to only include people who had antipathy towards PTM, who were not sympathetic to PTM. The entire government was filled with JUI cronies, ANP cronies, Pakistan People's Party cronies, and I think everyone saw the difference in the level of corruption, in the confusion in decision making. Because these guys stayed for a year, at one point, they made the entire cabinet resign. That's how bad the corruption was. But I think what it also showed through that was that when you really do reform, some of it will always be sustainable. So, for example, as hard as they tried, they could not sabotage the Sehat card completely. It took them 8 months to stop payments, and even then they were trying to give it to part of the population. And the moment we came back, we've given it to everyone. The Sehat card is even sustained in Punjab, despite Maryam Nawaz Sharif and her phone call leaks in which she was telling the uncle, her uncle Shehbaz Sharif, how the Sehat card was changing the lives of millions, but because its credit was going to Imran Khan, that it must be stopped. Shocking words for someone who claims to be the chief minister of Punjab. But even in Punjab, they haven't stopped the Sehat card. Our outsourcing of hospitals, although is not working as well as it was because of a poor culture of late releases to those hospitals, is still working. And once they tried to stop those outsourced partners from working, the local populations in the districts of Pata, where these hospitals were outsourced, actually protested because for the first time they saw good delivery. I can go on and on about the multiple things. I think we misunderstand the concept of sustainability. Whenever you get a change of government, some of the work that you do will be rolled back, but the majority of good work will sustain, and it increases the expectation of populations, and that's what PTI has done in Pakhtunkhwa in 10 years.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I just have one more question on economy, and then we'll move on to slightly different topic. So, although Imran Khan, before coming to power in 2018, he said that he has hundreds of people from expats who are willing to bring their experience, their knowledge and skill, and then and in the different areas. And then critics say that it wasn't the case. Now it appears that there is a possibility, remote though, that your government may come back again. Are you prepared? Do you have any research and development? Do you have a technocrat-led movements into different kind of areas to develop, say, for example, economy, that to how to counter the downfall of the economy if you're given the government?
I think I'll say a few things. First, I think Imran Khan's economic and governance track record speaks for itself, in particular in hindsight. I think it's fair to say that we could have been better, and it was the first time that PTI was in government and therefore learnt on the job. There's no doubt about that. I think it's also fair to say Their expectations from PTI were exceptionally high, and it took a certain amount of time to align those expectations. And it's also fair to say that transforming countries is more complex work than it appears to be from outside. I can actually say this from my experience of about 10 years as a management consultant with McKinsey, advising different governments in the world. For politicians, obviously have and need to have a very high aspiration and very high level of appetite. But the roadblocks in transformations, from vested interests to bureaucracies with inertia, to the fact that almost all good reform, or much of good reform, tends to be unpopulist in nature, makes doing reform harder work than it appears to. In terms of our next innings, I wouldn't say it's a remote possibility. I would say it's a certainty that Imran Khan will be the Prime Minister of Pakistan again, inshallah, because I don't think any leader in the history of Pakistan has enjoyed the popularity and legitimacy that Imran Khan enjoys from jail. We are ready, and I think that what is an obligation upon us is that this time around we radically and completely transform the economic and governance structure of the country. Again, it can't be done in a day. Pakistan's bureaucracy specializes in making sure that nothing moves in Pakistan, but we will do it. I think it needs to be done. That's not just Imran Khan's mission. I think my generation, which is the next generation of people that will lead Pakistan, and even more so, those younger than mine, want and expect a Pakistan that works much better than it works today or it has worked in the past.
Inshallah, that's what we hope, and that's what all generations, really, and the generations to come, we look forward to that good and great day when we don't have to leave Pakistan. There's no brain drain, and we serve our own country with pride and with relish. So that's great. So now moving on from that particular area that we covered, economy primarily, but that was because your financial background, illustrious financial background, really required that I ask your views. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa KP is a very important strategic part of Pakistan, with Balochistan, with Afghanistan in particular, and then under the spate of resurgency or law and order situation. And I know that there have been differences of opinion between the military establishment and your government about a military operation. And I would really like you to show a light what it is about, so our overseas Pakistanis or Anglophone Pakistanis understand what the actual issue is and how you or your government, without military operation, can handle it.
So, if your question is about military operations in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa or Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan, the geography of Pakistan means that militancy in Pakistan is almost always going to initiate in the western half of the country because of the porous borders with Afghanistan and because of the permanent instability that Afghanistan enjoys. Also because the western half of the country, in particular the southern districts of Pakhtunkhwa and the entire province of Balochistan, as well as bits of South Punjab, are the poor parts of the country. The economic disparity with the rest of the country means that all of these areas will be breeding grounds for discontent and militancy and terrorism. Our political elite has never understood this. And because of this, they have never really invested in the western half of the country in the way that they should have. If they had, if, for example, in the last 10 years, there were actually a western CPEC route, a motorway from Peshawar to Gwadar, I promise you, the economy of the entire western part of Pakistan would have changed, and the security situation of southern KP, of FATA, of Balochistan would have been different. But we don't do that. We don't realize that developing a country is more than just about ticking the boxes where you think your vote bank lies. And I think that's important. Now, because of these conditions that I've said, militancy, lack of law and order, crime in these areas has been high, in particular since the events of 9/11. And we had one set of operations that began after 2004-5, amplified around 2007, and then the 2009 operation of SWAT in 2009-10, and then finally after Operation Zarbeaz. KP has gained a lot in peace and prosperity since then. And at the same time, those impacted by operations have always had the misgivings that they have never been given the peace commitments for the sacrifices that they made. That is particularly true of FATA, which when handed over to Khyber Pakhtunkhwa was promised a lot of benefits in terms of financial packages, but never given any. And I think today what you see amongst the people of KP is actually an outcry against instability. It's an outcry against military operations that evacuates them from home, and the bar for that should be high. If you're unwilling to accept a military operation in Lahore or Karachi to find a few terrorists and evacuate the entire city, why should we do that in southern KP or northern Balochistan or FATA? I think we should look at it from that perspective, that every Pakistani and every bit of Pakistan is equal in the rights that it has. That's the first thing. Having said that, we need a joint and unequivocal response to terrorists and terrorism across the country, wherever it is. And more than ever, the people of KP, forget just the supporters of PTI, stand with that. And that requires beefing up the police, that requires beefing up civil intelligence, and that requires the country standing as one behind the military and the military intelligence agencies. And all of that, the two things it requires, again, are political stability and an uncontroversial military, as well as economic progress that gives us the resources to be able to both invest in people as well as our institutions. And I think both of these things can happen, but trust and mark my words, no military operations can be successful without the buy-in of local stakeholders. And in the way that the military operation marketed by the federal government was presented by the federal operation minister and the defense minister themselves was shambolic, because the ISPR spokesperson himself negated the irresponsible statements of the federal ministers when they said this was a new operation by confirming that it wasn't a new operation. Beyond that, in terms of activity against militancy, we in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa are used to living with that, and we support both the civil and military forces that do that on a continuous basis.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I know it's a very difficult situation, but I think you pleaded your case very well on this topic. So I say thank you very, very much, Taimur. And it's lovely to have you here. And I'm sure we'll like to have you again on our economic and political shows. Thank you very much, and good luck.
Thank you.
Right, dear audience. So we had a lovely, very candid, straight, heart-to-heart talk with Taimur Khan Jhagra, who is a young Pakistani, highly educated and trained in the financial world, who gave up his financial career to join the struggle to make Pakistan great again. And it was heartening to see that he has an in-depth analysis of the challenges Pakistan has, and then also a great resolve actually to rectify them once his government comes back. That is his leader, who is beloved person for the hundreds of millions Pakistanis, and probably a lot more in the entire world will come back to the power. So until next, I say goodbye from our London studios, and I'm Suhail Qureshi for Quews.news, the first ever overseas Pakistani TV channel. Goodbye.